Let us drift back through time, back to the early 1800s, to a city of spires and cobblestones, of windswept harbors and narrow streets that wind like the thoughts of the philosophers who walked them. Copenhagen. The name itself sounds like a sigh, doesn't it? Copenhagen. A city perched between the cold Baltic Sea and the warmer currents of European thought, where the light in winter comes late and leaves early, where shadows grow long even at midday. It is here, in this city of contrasts, that our story begins. Here, in a household both wealthy and weighted with sorrow, a boy is growing up who will one day give voice to the most intimate struggles of the human soul. His name is Søren Kierkegaard. Søren, the name means stern or severe in Danish, but also carries echoes of the Old Norse, of ancient sagas and northern melancholy. Kierkegaard, churchyard, a name that speaks of faith and mortality in equal measure. From his very name, we can sense the themes that will occupy his life. But for now, he is simply a child, walking these streets, watching, listening, absorbing the world around him with an intensity that others find unsettling. Let us walk with him, softly, through these early years. Let us wander the cobblestone paths of his childhood, where every stone seems to hold a memory, and every corner turned reveals another layer of complexity. The year is 1813, and Copenhagen is still recovering from wars, from bombardments, from the reshaping of kingdoms. The city breathes slowly, rebuilding itself, just as young Søren will one day learn to rebuild his understanding of what it means to exist. The Kierkegaard household stands in one of Copenhagen's better neighborhoods, a house that speaks of prosperity, of merchant wealth carefully accumulated. Søren's father, Michael Petersen Kierkegaard, has risen from humble origins as a shepherd boy on the windswept heaths of Jutland to become a successful businessman in the capital. It is a remarkable journey from the fields to the counting houses, from poverty to plenty. But prosperity has not brought peace to Michael's heart. No, this father carries within him a burden, a weight that presses down upon the household like a heavy winter sky. You see, Michael is a man of intense religious feeling, of deep Lutheran piety mixed with something darker, something that whispers to him of divine judgment and personal unworthiness. As a boy on those lonely heaths, during a moment of despair and cold and hunger, he once cursed God. This moment has never left him. It has grown in his memory like a shadow grows as the sun sets, longer and longer, until it seems to cover everything. He believes his family is cursed, that happiness is not meant for them, that his prosperity is merely a temporary shelter before inevitable loss. And loss does come. Søren's siblings die one by one, 5 of them before reaching adulthood. The household knows the sound of mourning, the presence of empty chairs at the table, the silences that grow where laughter should have been. Young Søren watches all of this. He is the 7th child, frail in body but extraordinary in mind. His father, perhaps seeing in this brilliant boy a chance at redemption, perhaps simply recognizing a kindred intensity, takes Søren on long walks through Copenhagen, engaging him in philosophical and theological discussions that would challenge most adults. Imagine it. A middle-aged man and a young boy, walking slowly through the streets, debating the nature of faith, the problem of suffering, the meaning of existence. The father does not speak down to the child. He speaks as if to an equal, as if this small boy might hold answers to the questions that torment him. These walks become the foundation of Søren's education, but they are not the cheerful outings of typical fathers and sons. They are exercises in imagination, yes, but imagination tinged with melancholy. Michael Kierkegaard, with his peculiar intensity, would take young Søren on what he called walking tours without ever leaving the house. Can you picture this? The father and son pacing back and forth in their rooms, while the father describes in elaborate detail the sights they would see if they were outside. Now we are passing the palace, Søren. Notice the guards in their uniforms. Now we turn down this street. See how the baker is setting out his morning bread. This strange practice teaches Søren something profound, that the inner life, the life of thought and imagination, can be as vivid, perhaps more vivid, than external reality. It also teaches him something sadder, that the mind can become a kind of prison, that one can walk without going anywhere, that one can be wealthy yet impoverished in spirit. But Søren is not only educated in melancholy. He attends the school of civic virtue, where his intellect shines with unmistakable brilliance. He masters languages, devours literature, excels in his studies. Yet he does not quite fit in. He is too serious, too intense, too given to mockery and irony. He uses wit as a shield, keeping others at a distance, even as he longs for connection. His classmates find him odd, this small figure with the bent spine and the enormous intellect, who can demolish arguments with surgical precision, but seems unable to simply relax and enjoy the ordinary pleasures of youth. At 17, he enters the University of Copenhagen to study theology, following the path his father has set for him. The university is a place of musty books and abstract debates, of Latin declensions and theological disputations. Søren throws himself into this world, but not with the blind devotion his father might have hoped for. Instead, he questions, challenges, pushes against the boundaries of conventional thought. He discovers literature and philosophy beyond the curriculum. He reads with a hunger that suggests he is looking for something, some answer to questions he can barely articulate. During his university years, something shifts in Søren. Perhaps it is the natural rebellion of youth, or perhaps it is something deeper, a necessary pushing away from the overwhelming presence of his father. He begins to frequent the cafes and theaters of Copenhagen. He dresses elegantly, sometimes even flamboyantly. He cultivates a persona, the witty aesthete, the sophisticated ironist, the man about town who can discourse on any subject with dazzling cleverness. But this is a mask, and even then, Søren knows it. Beneath the performance, the melancholy runs deep. He writes in his journals during this period, and these journals reveal a young man in crisis. He struggles with doubt, not just intellectual doubt about theological doctrines, but existential doubt, doubt about the meaning of his own life, about whether authentic existence is even possible. He feels himself to be playing a role rather than living genuinely. He uses words like despair and dread, though he does not yet have the philosophical framework to fully explore these concepts. One entry from this period is particularly poignant. He writes of needing to find the idea for which I can live and die. Not just an idea to think about, you see, but an idea to live for, to stake one's entire existence upon. This search for an organizing principle, for a truth that is true for him personally, not just true in the abstract, will become the driving force of his philosophy. In 1838, when Søren is 25, his father dies. This event is cataclysmic. Despite all the complexity of their relationship, despite the burden of the father's melancholy and intensity, there was also profound love and intellectual kinship. Michael Kierkegaard's death leaves Søren untethered, drifting, but it also, paradoxically, frees him. The overwhelming presence is gone. The son can begin to find his own voice. He returns to his theological studies with renewed purpose, completing his dissertation on irony, a topic that allows him to explore the gap between appearance and reality, between what we show the world and what we truly are. Slowly, the philosopher is emerging from the shadows of his father's house. Let us pause here, in this moment between grief and new beginning, and simply walk with Søren through the Copenhagen he loves. It is evening, perhaps, the time of day when the light softens and the city reveals its gentler character. The cobblestones are smooth under our feet, worn by centuries of walking, of merchants and students and dreamers who have passed this way. The canals reflect what little light remains, doubling the lamps, turning the water into flowing gold and amber. The spires of the churches rise into the darkening sky, pointing upward as if asking questions of the heavens. Søren walks slowly as he always does, his posture bent from childhood weakness, his eyes observant, missing nothing. He notices the flower seller packing up her wares, the smell of bread from a bakery, the sound of voices through an open window, a snatch of music, laughter, the ordinary texture of human life continuing around him. And he feels, as he so often does, both part of this life and separate from it, an observer chronicling his own existence, even as he lives it. The shadows of his childhood are not gone. They will never be entirely gone. The melancholy he inherited from his father, the awareness of mortality, the intensity of religious questioning, the sense of being marked out for something difficult and perhaps impossible, all of this remains. But now he begins to understand that these shadows are not merely obstacles. They are also, perhaps, the very material from which a philosophy might be built. A philosophy not of abstract systems and logical proofs, but of lived experience, of the individual standing alone before the infinite, making choices that define who they are. The boy in the melancholy household is becoming the man who will give voice to the struggles of individual existence. And as we leave him here, walking slowly through the evening streets of Copenhagen, we can sense that something new is beginning. Something that will ripple forward through time, through generations, changing how human beings understand their own freedom, their own authenticity, their own responsibility for becoming who they truly are. For now, though, he is simply walking, breathing the evening air, listening to the city's quiet sounds, carrying within him all the questions that will soon demand answers. And it is on one of these walks, on a spring evening in 1837, that Søren Kierkegaard first sees her. Regina Olsen. She is only 14 years old, the daughter of a prominent family, and he is 24, a young man already marked by melancholy and intellectual intensity. But there is something in that first glimpse, something that catches in his chest like a held breath. Perhaps it is her lightness, her youth, her embodiment of all the joy and simplicity that has eluded him throughout his shadowed childhood. He does not speak to her that day. He simply carries the image of her away with him, tucked somewhere deep inside where the darkness usually dwells. For the next few years, he watches from a distance, occasionally seeing her at social gatherings, in the parks, at concerts. Copenhagen is a small city, after all, and the circles of society overlap in predictable patterns. He continues his studies, delving deeper into philosophy and theology, wrestling with his father's legacy and his own spiritual uncertainties. But Regina remains there, a bright point in his consciousness, a possibility of happiness he barely dares to consider. In 1840, when she is 17 and he is 27, he finally approaches. The courtship is brief, intense, almost feverish. He brings to it all the passionate conviction of a man who has lived too long in his own head, who sees in this young woman not just a person, but a doorway to a different kind of existence. And Regina, perhaps dazzled by his intellect, his intensity, his complete and overwhelming focus on her, accepts his attention. Their engagement is announced. Families celebrate. The future seems to stretch before them, solid and certain. But even as he places the ring on her finger, even as he speaks words of commitment and promise, something inside Søren Kierkegaard is already pulling away. It is not that he does not love her. In his way, he loves her desperately, completely, with an intensity that frightens even him. It is rather that he begins to understand something terrible about himself, that he cannot give her what she deserves, that he is too damaged, too melancholic, too consumed by his inner demons to be a proper husband. His father's darkness lives in him still. The family secrets, the religious terrors, the sense of being marked by fate, all of it rises up to meet him at the very moment he tries to reach for ordinary happiness. The engagement lasts just over a year, but for Kierkegaard it must feel like an eternity of internal conflict. He walks the streets of Copenhagen with a new restlessness now, circling the same paths again and again, trying to think his way through the impossible maze of his own heart. Should he marry her and risk making her miserable with his melancholy? Should he break the engagement and wound her deeply, but spare her a lifetime of unhappiness? There is no philosophy book that can tell him what to do. There is no theological doctrine that makes the choice clear. He is alone with his decision, standing at a crossroads where either path leads to suffering. In the parks where lovers stroll, beneath the trees that are full now with summer leaves, Kierkegaard walks alone, or sometimes with Regina beside him, and the torment grows. She senses something is wrong, but she is young, inexperienced in the ways of such complicated inner turmoil. She tries to understand him, to reach him, but he is already building walls between them, already preparing for what he has begun to believe is inevitable. The light that first drew him to her now seems to illuminate only the impossibility of their union. And so in the autumn of 1841, he does the thing that will haunt him for the rest of his life. He breaks the engagement. He does it in the cruelest way possible, though perhaps he believes it to be kindness. He pretends that he no longer loves her. He acts cold, indifferent, even callous, He wants her to hate him, to be angry rather than heartbroken, to believe that he is simply a cad who changed his mind rather than a tormented soul trying to protect her from his own darkness. But Regina does not hate him. She is devastated. She pleads with him to reconsider. She writes letters. She tries to understand what went wrong, and Kierkegaard, playing his terrible role, must maintain the pretense, must keep pushing her away even as it tears him apart inside. The ring is returned, the engagement is formally dissolved. Copenhagen society buzzes with scandal and speculation. Poor Regina Olsen, jilted by the strange, intense Kierkegaard boy. Poor young woman. And Kierkegaard himself flees, quite literally. In October 1841, just weeks after the break, he travels to Berlin, putting physical distance between himself and the wreckage of his romantic life. He attends lectures by the philosopher Schelling. He walks the streets of a foreign city, trying to outpace his own guilt and grief. But Regina follows him everywhere, in his thoughts, in his dreams, in the way every young woman he passes on the street reminds him of what he has lost. And it is there, in Berlin, in that state of heightened emotional turmoil, that something remarkable begins to happen. Kierkegaard starts to write, not academic treatises or dry philosophical essays, but something new, something personal and urgent and alive. He begins to transform his pain into insight, his personal crisis into philosophical exploration. The question that torments him, this question of whether he made the right choice, whether he chose authentically or simply ran away in fear, becomes the foundation for his thinking about choice itself, about what it means to be a self, about how we become who we are. When he returns to Copenhagen in March 1842, he brings with him the manuscript of his first major work, his dissertation on irony. But more importantly, he brings a new sense of purpose. His heartbreak has cracked him open, and through that crack, philosophy pours forth. Over the next several years, he will write at a furious pace, producing book after book, often publishing multiple works in a single year. And Regina will be there in all of it, woven through his writing like a golden thread, sometimes explicitly, often in disguise, always present. He sees her sometimes in Copenhagen's streets and parks. She eventually marries another man, a respectable civil servant named Johann Friedrich Schlegel, and Kierkegaard watches from a distance as she builds the ordinary life he could not give her. Sometimes they pass each other on the street, sometimes their eyes meet. The pain of it never quite fades. In his journals, in his private writings, he returns to her again and again, trying to understand what happened, trying to justify his choice, trying to forgive himself. He writes that breaking the engagement was his greatest act of love, that he sacrificed his own happiness to preserve hers. But the question mark always remains, hovering over his certainty like morning mist over the harbor. And yet, from this wound, this personal catastrophe, comes the work that will change philosophy forever. It is as if Kierkegaard needed to live through this impossible choice, this authentic confrontation with his own freedom and limitations, in order to understand what it means to be human. His philosophy is born from experience, from suffering, from the terrible responsibility of having to choose without knowing if the choice is right. In the years following the break with Regina, Kierkegaard develops a routine, a rhythm to his days that becomes as familiar to the people of Copenhagen as the ringing of church bells. Every afternoon, precisely at the same time, he emerges from his apartment for his daily walk. He dresses impeccably, always fashionable despite his philosophical preoccupations, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the cobblestones, and he walks through the old streets, past the shops and cafes, through the parks and along the harbor. He walks and thinks and walks, the two activities inseparable. People recognize him, this peculiar figure who always seems lost in thought, yet somehow aware of everything around him. He stops to talk with strangers, with street vendors and children, with workers and students. He has a gift for conversation, a sharp wit and a genuine interest in people that contrasts strangely with his reputation as a melancholy loner. But even as he chats and jokes, part of him remains elsewhere, turning over ideas, working through philosophical problems, composing sentences in his head that he will later commit to paper. He walks past Regina's house sometimes, unable to help himself. He sees the windows lit in the evening, imagines the domestic life unfolding inside, the life he chose to reject. Does she think of him? Does she understand yet why he did what he did? Does she hate him, pity him, or simply try to forget him? He cannot know. They exist now in separate worlds, though only a few streets apart. The distance between them is measured not in meters, but in the choice he made, the absolute and irreversible decision that divided his life into before and after. And as he walks, he thinks about choice itself, about what it means that we must choose, that we cannot escape the necessity of decision. There is no standing still, no neutral position. Even refusing to choose is itself a choice, one that shapes who we become. This is the dizzying freedom of human existence, and it is terrifying. Before Regina, he understood this intellectually. After Regina, he knows it in his bones, in the ache that never quite leaves his chest, in the way he startles awake some nights with her name on his lips. He writes about this in various guises, hiding his personal pain behind pseudonyms and fictional scenarios. He creates characters who face impossible choices, who must decide who they will be without any guarantee that they are choosing rightly. He writes about the young man who cannot decide between marriage and bachelorhood. He writes about Abraham, called by God to sacrifice his son, facing a choice that reason cannot resolve. He writes about Socrates, choosing death rather than betraying his principles. All of these figures become mirrors for his own experience, ways of exploring the Regina affair from every possible angle, turning it over and over like a jeweler examining a stone. The writing becomes a kind of compulsion, a way of processing what cannot otherwise be understood. He publishes under multiple names, creating an elaborate game of authorship where different voices debate and contradict each other. There is Johannes de Silencio, the silent one, who writes about faith. There is Victor Eremita, the victorious hermit, who edits papers on aesthetics and ethics. There is Johannes Climacus, who explores the paradoxes of Christianity. And behind them all is Søren Kierkegaard, both revealed and hidden, confessing and concealing, using philosophy as both shield and scalpel. His apartment fills with books and papers, the physical evidence of his intellectual outpouring. He works late into the night, fueled by coffee and the restless energy of his mind. And then in the afternoon, he walks again, through the same streets, past the same landmarks, tracing and retracing the geography of his loss and transformation. There is a particular bench in Frederiksberg Gardens where Kierkegaard often sits, a quiet spot beneath old trees where the noise of the city fades to a distant murmur. Here, with the dappled light filtering through leaves, he rests during his walks and lets his mind settle into deeper contemplation. The gardens are beautiful in every season, bright with spring blossoms, lush in summer green, golden in autumn, stark and honest in winter. And through all these seasons, Kierkegaard returns, thinking always about the same central questions that his experience with Regina has opened up. What does it mean to be authentic? This becomes one of his great concerns. Not just to follow rules or conventions, not just to do what others expect or what seems sensible, but to take responsibility for one's own existence, to choose oneself deliberately and consciously. He realizes that for most of his engagement to Regina, he was trying to be something he was not, trying to fit himself into the role of proper suitor and future husband. And when he broke the engagement, painful as it was, he was perhaps choosing to be authentic, to acknowledge the truth of who he actually was, rather than who he wished to be. But authenticity is not simple. It is not a single choice made once and then finished. It is a constant process, a continual choosing, a lifelong project of becoming. Every day, every moment, we are called upon to choose ourselves anew, to take responsibility for who we are and who we are becoming. This is exhausting. This is terrifying. This is what it means to be human. And most people, Kierkegaard believes, flee from this responsibility. They lose themselves in distractions, in social roles, in the crowd, in busyness and entertainment, and the numbing comfort of routine. He writes about what he calls the aesthetic life, the life of immediate pleasure-seeking and distraction. It is a pleasant enough existence on the surface, pursuing beauty and sensation, avoiding boredom and pain. But it is empty at the core, because it involves no real commitment, no authentic choice of self. The aesthetic person flits from experience to experience, never fully engaged, always holding something back, afraid of being truly present. Kierkegaard knows this life well. He has watched it in Copenhagen's social circles, and he has felt its temptations in himself. There is also the ethical life, the life of duty and responsibility, of marriage and career and social obligation. This is a more substantial existence, one that involves commitment and the acceptance of universal moral laws. The ethical person becomes part of the larger human community, accepting its standards and finding meaning in fulfilling their roles and responsibilities. This is the life Regina now lives, married to Schlegel, embedded in the respectable structures of Copenhagen society. It is a good life, a meaningful life, and Kierkegaard does not dismiss it. But he sees its limitations too. For some people, perhaps for him, there is something beyond the ethical, something that cannot be captured by universal rules and social roles. He will later call this the religious life, though he does not mean merely attending church or following religious customs. He means something more radical, more personal, more absolute. He means the direct relationship between the individual and the infinite, the relationship that cannot be mediated by society or reason or even other people. It is a leap beyond the universal into the particular, beyond reason into faith, beyond safety into risk. Sitting on his bench in Frederiksberg Gardens, watching the light change through the trees, Kierkegaard lets these ideas settle and deepen. The personal has become philosophical. His heartbreak has become a lens through which to understand human existence. And though the pain remains, it will always remain, it has been transformed into something else, something that reaches beyond his own small story, to touch something universal about what it means to be alive, to choose, to become oneself. Years pass, and the wound slowly changes character. It never heals, not exactly, but it becomes part of him, woven into the fabric of who he is, rather than something separate and sharp. He continues to see Regina occasionally, these brief encounters on Copenhagen streets that are always charged with the weight of their shared past. Once, in a church, their eyes meet across the congregation. Once, at a concert, he sees her with her husband, and the old pain flares bright before subsiding again. She remains married, apparently content, living the life he could not give her. And he remains alone, married instead to his work, his writing, his relentless exploration of what it means to exist. He never stops thinking about her, never stops using their relationship as the raw material for his philosophy. In some of his works, he addresses her directly, though in disguised form, trying to explain, to justify, to make her understand why he did what he did. He wants her to know that breaking the engagement was an act of love, not its opposite. He wants her to see that he was trying to save her from himself, from the melancholy that would have made her miserable. He wants her forgiveness, though he never asks for it directly, and he is not sure he deserves it. In his journals, which no one will read until after his death, he is more direct, more honest, more vulnerable. He writes to Regina in a way he never could in person, pouring out his heart across page after page. He describes their relationship as the central event of his life, the pivot around which everything else turns. He tells her that she gave him everything, even in losing her, because she gave him the experience that made his philosophy possible. Without her, without the choice he made and the suffering that followed, he would have been just another academic philosopher. Clever but detached, writing about life without truly living it. And perhaps this is true. Perhaps his philosophy is so powerful precisely because it is so personal, so rooted in actual lived experience rather than abstract speculation. When he writes about choice, he knows what it costs. When he writes about anxiety, he has felt it in his chest, lying awake at night. When he writes about despair, he has lived through it, walked through its dark valleys. When he writes about faith, he knows it as a leap into darkness, not a comfortable certainty. His philosophy is existential in the deepest sense. It comes from existence, from the actual, concrete, painful, beautiful fact of being alive. As the afternoon light begins to soften toward evening, Kierkegaard ends his daily walk and turns toward home. His legs are tired from miles of walking, his mind is full of the ideas he has been turning over, and his heart carries its familiar ache. Tomorrow he will walk again. Tomorrow he will write again. adding more pages to the growing pile of his work. And somewhere in Copenhagen, Regina will go about her own life, perhaps thinking of him occasionally, perhaps not, forever connected to him by the choice he made all those years ago. He climbs the stairs to his apartment, to his desk and his books and his solitude. The personal crisis has become something larger now, something that speaks to anyone who has ever had to make an impossible choice, anyone who has ever wondered who they really are beneath their social roles, anyone who has ever stood before the dizzying freedom of their own existence and felt both its terror and its possibility. Kierkegaard has turned his heartbreak into a gift, though it is a gift that cost him everything. And as he lights his lamp and prepares to write again, the image of Regina Olsen is there with him still, a presence both painful and precious, the muse who made a philosopher out of a man, who transformed personal loss into universal insight, who taught him through absence what presence means. And so, from the depths of that heartbreak, from the quiet rooms where Kierkegaard sat with his memories and his lamp, something remarkable began to emerge, a philosophical architecture as intricate as the spires of Copenhagen itself. He began to see human existence not as a single path, but as a series of spheres, concentric circles of being, each one a different way of living in the world, each one a different relationship with meaning itself. And tonight, as we settle deeper into rest, we'll drift gently through these spheres with him, moving slowly from one to the next, like walking through connected rooms in a vast, quiet mansion where each chamber has its own atmosphere, its own particular light. The first sphere Kierkegaard described was what he called the aesthetic, and even the word itself has a softness to it, doesn't it? Aesthetic, from the Greek for sensation, for feeling, for the immediate experience of pleasure and beauty. Picture with me now the aesthetic life. Imagine someone who lives entirely in the present moment, seeking always the next beautiful thing, the next pleasurable experience. Perhaps they sit in a Copenhagen cafe as afternoon light pours golden through tall windows, sampling pastries and watching elegant strangers pass by. Or they attend the theater night after night, losing themselves in performances, in music, in art. The aesthetic person Kierkegaard suggested is like someone constantly flipping through pages of a beautiful book, never settling on any one page for too long, always seeking novelty, always pursuing the interesting and the entertaining. There's something seductive about this life, isn't there? Something we can all recognize in ourselves. The desire to experience beauty, to feel pleasure, to avoid boredom and pain. Kierkegaard understood this attraction deeply. He himself had lived in the aesthetic sphere, had been known in Copenhagen society as a wit, an ironist, someone who appreciated fine things and clever conversation. But as he wrote in the quiet of his study, as he reflected on this way of being, he began to see its limitations, its particular form of suffering. Because the aesthetic life, for all its pleasures, leads inevitably to a kind of despair. The despair of satiation, of boredom, of realizing that no pleasure lasts, that each beautiful moment fades, that you are always chasing something that dissolves the instant you grasp it. Imagine living only for the next delight, the next distraction. At first it feels like freedom, like fullness, but gradually you begin to feel empty, hollow, like you're skimming across the surface of existence without ever diving deep. You have no commitments, no lasting connections, because commitment would limit your options, would tie you down. And so you remain eternally light, eternally free, and eternally alone. This Kierkegaard wrote with such gentle precision is the melancholy of the aesthetic life. The person who lives this way, he suggested, is not truly choosing at all. They are simply reacting, responding to whatever stimulus comes next, like a leaf floating on water, moved by every current but directing nothing. And so we see the aesthetic sphere clearly now, a beautiful room filled with lovely things, with music playing and candles glowing, but somehow unsatisfying, somehow insufficient. There's nothing wrong with beauty, nothing wrong with pleasure, Kierkegaard would say. But if this is all there is, if this is the entirety of existence, then something essential is missing. The aesthetic person has not yet become themselves, has not yet taken responsibility for their own being. They are, in a sense, still asleep, still dreaming, moving through a world of surfaces without ever waking to the question of who they truly are, what they truly value, how they should truly live. And it is this question, this awakening, that leads to the next sphere. But we'll come to that gently, slowly, letting the aesthetic fade like music growing softer in the distance. From the aesthetic life, with all its beauty and all its emptiness, there emerges a different possibility, a different way of being in the world. Kierkegaard called this second sphere the ethical life, and even as we speak these words, we can feel the shift in tone, in weight, in seriousness. Where the aesthetic person flits from pleasure to pleasure, the ethical person makes commitments, lasting commitments to principles, to people, to responsibilities that extend beyond the present moment. Picture now someone who rises each morning with a sense of duty, who honors their promises, who understands themselves as part of a larger social fabric where their choices matter, where their actions have consequences for others. The ethical sphere, Kierkegaard suggested, is where most people live most of their lives, where we become spouses, parents, professionals, citizens. It is the realm of marriage rather than romance, of vocation rather than entertainment, of duty rather than whim. And there is something admirable about this, something solid and good. The ethical person has awakened from the dream of pure pleasure and recognized that life requires commitment, requires the courage to choose one path and forego others, to say yes to something specific and therefore no to everything else. This is no small thing. This is maturity, responsibility, the foundation of society itself. Imagine a parent sitting by a child's bedside through a long night of illness, or a person going to work each day to support their family, or someone honoring a difficult promise even when it would be easier to break it. This is the ethical life in its fullness. And Kierkegaard, even as he critiqued it, honored it. He saw that the ethical person has achieved something the aesthetic person has not. They have a self that persists over time, a coherent identity built on principles and commitments. They are not blown about by every wind of desire. They have anchored themselves in responsibility. But as Kierkegaard sat in his study, writing by lamplight, reflecting on his own broken engagement, on the weight of duty and the claims of universal morality, he began to see that the ethical sphere, too, has its limitations, its own particular form of despair. Because the ethical life, for all its nobility, can become a kind of prison. The ethical person must suppress their individuality in favor of universal rules. They must conform to social expectations, fulfill their role, do what duty demands. And sometimes, Kierkegaard whispered in his writings, sometimes duty itself can be a way of avoiding the deepest questions, the most personal confrontations with existence. What if the universal rules don't account for your particular situation? What if duty conflicts with a deeper calling? What if following all the rules, being a good person in society's eyes, still leaves you feeling that something essential is missing? The ethical life can become, in Kierkegaard's analysis, a comfortable hiding place, a way of letting society decide for you, of following the path that's already laid out, of never truly confronting the radical freedom and radical responsibility of your own individual existence before the infinite. You can be a perfectly ethical person, fulfilling every duty, following every rule, and still not be authentically yourself. And so we see the ethical sphere now, clearly and gently, a well-ordered room, everything in its proper place, duties fulfilled, promises kept, a life of integrity and honor. And yet, there's something beyond even this. Something that calls to us from outside the comfortable structures of social morality. Kierkegaard understood both the necessity and the insufficiency of the ethical life. He saw that we must pass through it, must learn commitment and responsibility, but that for some people, at some moments, there comes a call that transcends all universal rules. A call that is utterly individual, utterly personal. A call that comes from beyond the human realm altogether. And this call, this possibility, opens onto the third sphere, the religious sphere. But we approach it slowly, reverently, like approaching a threshold at twilight. The religious sphere, Kierkegaard approaches it with such care, such trembling, such absolute seriousness, and yet we can explore it here together with gentleness, with the soft understanding that comes when we're half asleep, when the boundaries of the rational mind begin to dissolve. The religious life, as Kierkegaard understood it, is not simply about going to church or following religious rules. That would still be ethical, still within the realm of duty and universal morality. No, the religious sphere is something altogether different. It is the realm of the absolute individual standing before the absolute infinite, alone, without mediators, without the comfort of rules that apply to everyone. It is the realm of paradox, of faith, of a relationship so personal that it cannot be universalized or explained to others. Think of Abraham, Kierkegaard's most powerful example. Abraham, who heard a call from God to sacrifice his beloved son Isaac. This story haunted Kierkegaard, appeared again and again in his writings, because it represents something that cannot be reconciled with ethics, cannot be made comfortable or reasonable. From an ethical standpoint, Abraham's intended action is simply murder. It violates the universal moral law. No ethical system can justify it. And yet Abraham, in faith, suspends the ethical, places his relationship with the infinite above all human understanding, all social morality. He makes what Kierkegaard called the teleological suspension of the ethical, a phrase that sounds complex but means simply this, that the religious individual answers to something beyond ethics, beyond reason, beyond what can be explained or justified to others. This is terrifying, isn't it? And Kierkegaard knew it was terrifying. He called Abraham a knight of faith, someone who operates in a realm that looks like madness from the outside. And Kierkegaard himself never claimed to have achieved this faith. He circled it, wrote about it, yearned for it, but remained perhaps in what he called infinite resignation, seeing clearly what faith would require but unable to make the leap. Because the religious sphere requires the most difficult thing imaginable. It requires you to embrace paradox, to accept that your relationship with the infinite might call you beyond all human understanding, might isolate you completely, might make you incomprehensible even to yourself. But there's something else here too, something that emerges as we sit with this idea quietly. The religious sphere is also the realm of the deepest authenticity, the most complete selfhood. Because here, finally, you are not living for pleasure, not living according to social rules, but living in direct relationship with the ground of existence itself. You have become utterly yourself, not the self that society wants you to be, not the self that desires pleasure, but the self that stands before infinity in all its vulnerability, all its particularity. This is what Kierkegaard meant by choosing yourself, not choosing your desires or your social role, but choosing to accept yourself as you are, in all your limitation and all your possibility, before the infinite. Picture Kierkegaard now, sitting in his room as night deepens over Copenhagen, writing about these three spheres, these three ways of being, and understanding that most of us move between them, live in different spheres at different times, or live in transitional spaces between them. The aesthetic, the ethical, the religious, they are not destinations but orientations, not places but ways of relating to existence. And perhaps, as we drift here together, we can see them not as judgments, but as descriptions, as Kierkegaard's attempt to map the inner territory of human possibility, to show us the different ways we might live, the different relationships we might have with meaning and truth, the aesthetic life of beauty and pleasure, the ethical life of duty and commitment, the religious life of faith and paradox. Each one a room in the mansion of existence, each one with its own light and shadow, its own gifts and its own despairs. And Kierkegaard, walking through Copenhagen streets, watching people pass, saw in each face a mystery. Which sphere does this person inhabit? What unspoken despairs do they carry? What possibilities have they foreclosed? What leaps have they not yet made? These questions, so gentle and so profound, drift through his writings like snow through lamplight. Let us circle back now, gently, softly, through these three spheres again, because Kierkegaard believed that the deepest truths must be approached again and again, from different angles, with different light falling on them. The aesthetic, the ethical, the religious like three concentric circles or three depths of water, each one revealing itself more fully the longer we contemplate it. And perhaps, as we drift here together in this quiet space, we can let these ideas settle into us without grasping them too tightly, without needing to fully understand, just letting them be present like familiar objects in a darkened room. The aesthetic life, we see it again now and perhaps with more compassion. The person who seeks beauty, who values experience, who wants to feel alive, is this not understandable? Is this not part of being human? Kierkegaard himself loved beauty, loved music and theater and the play of ideas. The aesthetic is not wrong, it is simply incomplete. It is the youth of the soul, the springtime before the harder seasons come, and some people remain there always, moving from delight to delight. And perhaps there's a kind of grace in that too, a lightness that has its own value. But for those who feel the emptiness beneath the beauty, for those who sense that pleasure alone cannot answer the deeper questions, for those people, the aesthetic becomes transparent, becomes a doorway to something more substantial. The ethical life, we return to it now with the same gentleness, the same understanding. The person who keeps promises, who honors commitments, who builds a life of integrity and responsibility, this is admirable, necessary, the foundation of community and civilization. Kierkegaard saw this, respected this, even as he pushed beyond it. The ethical sphere is the maturity of the soul, the summer of full growth and harvest. It is where we become reliable, trustworthy, where we learn that our actions matter, that we are accountable to others and to ourselves. And for many people, this is enough. This is a good life, a meaningful life, a life well lived. There is no judgment here, no hierarchy of better and worse, only different possibilities, different depths. But for some, for those particular individuals who feel a call that cannot be answered by any universal rule, who sense that their deepest truth lies beyond what society can validate or ethics can justify, for those people, the religious sphere beckons. And Kierkegaard, circling this realm in his writings, in his prayers, in his midnight vigils, tried to describe what cannot quite be described, this lonely, exalted, terrifying place of absolute faith. It is not for everyone. It may not even be fully achievable. But knowing that it exists, knowing that there is a realm beyond pleasure and beyond duty, a realm where the individual stands utterly alone before the infinite, this changes everything. This transforms how we understand human existence itself. The three spheres, aesthetic, ethical, religious, like three ways of being awake, or perhaps three ways of being asleep and dreaming. And Kierkegaard, with his melancholic genius, mapped these territories for us, left us a guide to the interior landscape of existence. He did not demand that we all become knights of faith, did not insist that everyone must reach the religious sphere. He simply showed us that it exists, showed us the possibilities and the costs of each way of living. He showed us that existence has depth, has dimensionality, that we are not simply animals seeking pleasure or citizens following rules, but infinite beings capable of infinite relationships with meaning itself. As these ideas drift through our minds now, softening like snow settling on rooftops, we might feel how they connect to our own lives. The moments when we've lived aesthetically, chasing beauty or pleasure, the moments when we've lived ethically, honoring duty and commitment. And perhaps those rare moments when we've touched something beyond both, something absolute and terrifying and utterly our own. Kierkegaard gives us permission to recognize all of these moments, to see them clearly, to understand that existence is not simple, not straightforward, but complex and mysterious and endlessly deep. And there is something peaceful in this recognition, something that allows us to hold our own lives more gently, with more understanding, as we drift deeper into rest. And so we complete our gentle journey through Kierkegaard's three spheres of existence. These rooms of consciousness he mapped with such care, such precision, such melancholic wisdom. The aesthetic, the ethical, the religious. Three words that we've spoken again and again, letting them become familiar, letting them settle into the rhythm of breath and rest. And perhaps now they feel less like philosophical concepts and more like old friends, like quiet presences that will remain with us as we drift towards sleep, as we release the day and all its concerns. Kierkegaard himself, sitting in his Copenhagen study as night deepens around him, his lamp burning low, his pen moving slowly across the page, he returns again and again to these ideas, turns them like precious stones in lamplight, examines them from every angle. He knows that he is describing something essential about human existence, something that will outlive him, something that will speak to people in distant times and places who have never seen Copenhagen, never walked its cobblestone streets, never felt the particular melancholy of Danish twilight. He is mapping the interior, charting the depths, leaving a guide for future travelers through the landscape of consciousness. The aesthetic life, so beautiful and so empty. We see it now as clearly as a room we've visited, with all its delights and all its disappointments. The ethical life, so solid and so demanding, we understand it now as the structure most of us inhabit, the framework of responsibility and commitment that shapes our days. And the religious life, so mysterious and so absolute, we sense it now as a possibility always present, a door that remains always unlocked, waiting for those who feel called to step through it into paradox and faith. These three spheres, these three orientations, these three depths, Kierkegaard's gift to us, offered with such gentleness beneath all his intellectual rigor. And as we rest here now, letting these ideas dissolve like mist at dawn, we might feel grateful for this Danish philosopher who took his own suffering, his own heartbreak, his own impossible longing, and transformed it into wisdom that continues to illuminate existence. His engagement broken, his heart scarred, his melancholy deep and abiding. And yet from all of this, from all that pain, came this beautiful architecture of understanding, this map of the soul's possible journeys, the aesthetic, the ethical, the religious, each one a way of being, each one a relationship with meaning, each one a room in the vast mansion of human possibility. The ideas settle now like falling snow on Copenhagen's rooftops, on its church spires, on the streets where Kierkegaard walked alone with his thoughts. Falling snow on the study where he wrote through the night, on the lamp that illuminated his pages, on the portrait of Regina that perhaps still hung somewhere in his memory, even as he wrote about Abraham and faith and the leap beyond reason. Falling snow on the three spheres of existence, aesthetic, ethical, religious, each one receiving the same gentle covering, the same softening, the same quiet transformation as night deepens and all distinctions begin to blur. And we rest now with these ideas, holding them lightly, letting them be present without demanding that we fully grasp them, without needing to decide which sphere we inhabit or should inhabit. We simply rest with the knowledge that existence has depth, that there are possibilities we may not have considered, that the interior landscape is vast and mysterious and worthy of gentle exploration. Kierkegaard's gift to us, aesthetic, ethical, religious, pleasure, duty, faith, beauty, responsibility, paradox, the three spheres turning slowly like a mobile in the breath of consciousness, catching light from different angles as we drift deeper into peace, deeper into rest, deeper into the soft darkness where all philosophies dissolve into simple being, simple presence, simple breath. The three spheres, falling snow, Copenhagen at night, and Kierkegaard's lamp still burning, still illuminating, still casting its gentle light across the centuries, reaching us here now as we let go and drift into the deep, peaceful waters of sleep. And so we drift forward, carried gently on the currents of thought, moving from those three spheres, aesthetic, ethical, religious, into deeper waters still, waters that Kierkegaard navigated with both courage and trembling. The lamp still burns in his study, casting its amber glow across scattered pages, and we find ourselves drawn into the heart of his most profound insights, ideas about anxiety, about despair, about the strange vertigo of being human and free. Kierkegaard wrote about anxiety in a way no one had before, not as a disorder to be cured, but as something essential, something revealing. He called it the dizziness of freedom. Imagine standing at the edge of a great height, looking down into possibility itself. Not a physical cliff, but the precipice of choice, of potential, of all the lives you might live and all the selves you might become. That dizziness, that unsettling sensation, that is anxiety revealing your freedom to you. The dizziness of freedom, let those words settle softly, the dizziness of freedom. We feel it when we stand before important choices, when we realize that nothing external compels us, that we are, in Kierkegaard's view, radically free and radically responsible. The ground seems to shift beneath us, not because we are falling, but because we are flying, or could fly, or must choose whether to fly. In Copenhagen, on quiet evenings, Kierkegaard would walk and feel this dizziness, this anxiety that accompanied his awareness of infinite possibility. The street stretched before him in all directions, and each direction was a metaphor, a symbol of choice itself. He could turn left toward the harbor, right toward the gardens, straight ahead toward the old church. And in these simple navigations, he felt the larger truth, that existence itself is navigation, is choosing, is becoming. Anxiety, he wrote, is ambiguous. It is both attraction and repulsion, both fear and desire. We are anxious before possibility because possibility is both wonderful and terrible. It promises everything and threatens everything. It invites us to become ourselves, and that invitation is the most exhilarating and most frightening thing in the world. The dizziness of freedom, we return to this phrase like a gentle wave returning to shore. The dizziness of freedom. And as we breathe slowly, deeply, we can almost feel what Kierkegaard meant, that anxiety is not our enemy, but our teacher, showing us where we are free, showing us where we must choose, showing us that we are not determined, not fixed, but perpetually in the process of becoming. He distinguished this existential anxiety from fear. Fear has an object, something specific we're afraid of, but anxiety is objectless, a mood that pervades everything when we confront our own freedom. It's the feeling of standing before the infinite, before the unknown future, before all the versions of ourselves we might become or fail to become. And Kierkegaard, walking through Copenhagen as the evening deepens into night, felt this anxiety as a companion, a reminder that he was alive, that he was free, that each step was his own. The city around him, the amber lights in windows, the sound of distant bells, the smell of the sea carried on the wind, all of it seemed more vivid, more present, more real when experienced through this lens of anxiety and freedom. The dizziness of freedom. The dizziness of freedom. We let the phrase echo softly like footsteps on cobblestones, like waves against the harbor wall, like breath itself, and we move deeper into Kierkegaard's world, deeper into the gentle exploration of what it means to be human, to be free, to be anxious and alive as we drift, as we float, as we let go into the philosophical twilight that surrounds us like a soft blanket, warm and infinite. And from anxiety we drift gently into another territory, a darker valley that Kierkegaard mapped with unflinching honesty and tender care, the territory of despair. He called it, in one of his most haunting phrases, the sickness unto death. Not a physical sickness, but a spiritual one, a sickness of the self, a condition of being human that we must understand, must face, must move through if we are to become truly ourselves. The sickness unto death, let those words rest softly, the sickness unto death. Kierkegaard meant that despair is the condition of not being able to die, of being trapped in a self that is not yet authentic, not yet whole. It is the misalignment between who we are and who we might be, between our actual existence and our potential existence. He described despair with such precision, such care. There is the despair of not being conscious that one has a self, moving through life in a kind of sleepwalk, unaware of one's own depth, one's own freedom. Then there is the despair of not wanting to be oneself, the rejection of one's own particular life, the wish to be someone else, somewhere else, something other than what one is. And finally, there is the despair of willing to be oneself, but only on one's own terms. The defiance that refuses grace, refuses relationship, refuses the humility of accepting oneself as a created being. The sickness unto death. We return to this phrase like returning to a familiar room, the sickness unto death. And Kierkegaard, in his study with that amber lamp still burning, understood this sickness intimately. He felt it in his own life, the despair of his broken engagement, the despair of his complicated relationship with his father, the despair of feeling misunderstood by his society, by his church, by the world around him. But he wrote about despair not to increase our suffering, but to name it, to illuminate it, to show us the way through. For Kierkegaard believed that we cannot become ourselves without first recognizing our despair, without first seeing clearly the ways we are not yet authentic, not yet whole. Despair, he wrote, is actually a mark of the eternal in us. Only a being with an eternal dimension, with spirit, with depth, can despair. Animals do not despair, objects do not despair. But humans, caught between the finite and infinite, between temporality and eternity, between necessity and possibility, We despair because we are aware of what we might be and aware of what we are not yet. The sickness unto death. The phrase becomes almost melodic, almost like a lullaby in its repetition. And we see Kierkegaard walking slowly through Copenhagen in the gray afternoon light, past the old buildings that have stood for centuries, past the church where he struggled with faith, past the park where he once walked with Regina, and in his walking there is both the despair and the transcendence of despair. For the way out of despair, Kierkegaard taught, is not to escape the self, but to become more deeply oneself. To accept oneself completely, including the despair itself. To stand before God, or before the infinite, before existence itself, and say, I am who I am, finite and limited, flawed and broken, and yet also infinite in potential, eternal in spirit, capable of authentic existence. This is what he called the movement of faith, not a blind belief in dogma, but a radical acceptance of oneself in relation to something greater than oneself. It is choosing oneself, but choosing oneself as given, as created, as part of something infinite and mysterious. The sickness unto death, and the healing that comes from recognition, from honesty, from the courage to face what we are and what we are not. Kierkegaard's words drift through time like gentle snow, covering the harsh edges of existence with something softer, something more bearable. And we, listening to his insights across the centuries, feel ourselves held in that same gentle honesty. The recognition that despair is part of being human, that we all feel this misalignment sometimes, this sense of not quite fitting into our own lives, and that this feeling, this sickness, can be the beginning of healing, the beginning of authentic existence, if we have the courage to face it, to name it, to move through it towards something truer, something deeper, something more real. And now, having walked through anxiety and despair, we arrive at the threshold of perhaps Kierkegaard's most famous concept, the leap of faith. Not a leap away from reason, but a leap beyond it, a movement that cannot be calculated, cannot be guaranteed, cannot be made without risk and trembling. The leap of faith, let those words hover softly in the air. The leap of faith. Kierkegaard saw that there are truths that cannot be reached by philosophical argument alone, realities that cannot be proven but must be lived. He had spent years in the aesthetic sphere, years in the ethical sphere, and he understood their value and their limitations. But the religious sphere, the sphere of authentic faith, required something different, something more radical, a leap. Imagine standing at the edge of the known, looking into the unknown. All your rational faculties can take you to the edge, can map the territory behind you, can calculate probabilities and weigh evidence, but they cannot carry you across the gap. At some point you must leap. You must choose. You must commit yourself to a truth that cannot be objectively proven, but which transforms everything when embraced. The leap of faith, the leap of faith. We say it slowly, softly, like a prayer or a meditation. In Kierkegaard's Copenhagen, there were many who claimed faith without the leap, who inherited their religion as a comfortable social position, who attended church out of habit, who believed because it was expected. But this, Kierkegaard insisted, was not authentic faith at all. True faith requires what he called the teleological suspension of the ethical, a phrase that sounds complex but points to something profound. It means that in the religious sphere, the individual's relationship to the absolute takes precedence over universal ethical rules. He explored this through the story of Abraham, asked by God to sacrifice his son Isaac, a terrible paradox that cannot be resolved ethically, but which represents the collision between the ethical and the religious, between duty and faith. The leap of faith is not comfortable, it is not safe, it is not reasonable in any conventional sense. It is a passionate commitment made in the face of uncertainty, made despite anxiety, made through despair, made by the solitary individual who stands before the infinite and says, yes, yes I believe, yes I commit, yes I leap. And Kierkegaard, walking through the evening streets of his beloved city, felt the weight and the lightness of this leap. He had made his own leaps, broken his engagement in a leap of faith that he could not fully explain, committed himself to his writing in a leap of faith that brought him mockery and misunderstanding, embraced his Christianity in a leap of faith that set him at odds with the established church. The leap of faith, we return to it again, circling back like walking the same path at different times of day, seeing it in different light. The leap is not made once and for all, but repeatedly, daily, moment by moment. Each authentic choice is a small leap of faith. Each time we choose to be ourselves rather than what others expect, we leap. Each time we commit to love, to vocation, to truth, we leap. Kierkegaard wrote that faith begins precisely where thinking leaves off. Not because faith is irrational, but because it is transrational, beyond the reach of pure logic. It involves the whole person, intellect, emotion, will, body, spirit, all leaping together into a relationship with the infinite, with God, with existence itself. The leap of faith, the leap of faith, the words become softer, more distant, like echoes in a cathedral. And we can feel, perhaps, what Kierkegaard meant. That there are moments in life when we stand at the threshold of something greater than ourselves, when we must choose without certainty, when we must commit without proof, when we must leap. And in those moments, anxiety and despair are not eliminated but transformed. They become part of the leap itself, part of the risk, part of the authenticity of the movement. We leap with trembling, with fear, with uncertainty, and that trembling is not a failure of faith, but its very signature, its very authenticity. The leap of faith, and the infinite gentleness of the God or the existence or the truth that receives us when we leap. Kierkegaard believed in a love that meets us in our leaping, that honors our freedom even as it invites us beyond ourselves. And we, drifting now in this philosophical space, feel ourselves held by something similar, a gentle invitation to let go, to trust, to leap softly into sleep itself, into the unknown country of dreams where we are always already held. We return now, gently, softly, to the heart of it all, to the idea that appears again and again in Kierkegaard's writings like a refrain, like a bell tolling across the city, the idea of choosing oneself, choosing oneself. Let those words rest, choosing oneself. What could this mean? We choose breakfast, we choose our path through the city, we choose our words. But choosing oneself is something different, something deeper, something that happens not once but continuously, like breathing. To choose oneself is to take full responsibility for who one is, not just one's actions, but one's entire existence, one's history, one's limitations, one's possibilities. It is to say, this is my life, these are my circumstances, this is my particular constellation of gifts and wounds, and I choose it. I claim it. I own it. Not with resignation, but with passion, not with despair, but with commitment. Choosing oneself, we let the phrase repeat, let it sink deeper. Kierkegaard saw that most people do not choose themselves at all. They drift through life allowing others to define them, allowing circumstances to shape them, allowing convention and expectation and fear to determine who they become. They never take that decisive step of saying, I am this, and I choose to be this more fully, more authentically, more consciously. In his study By the Light of That Ever-Burning Lamp, Kierkegaard wrote about the moment when the ethical individual chooses himself. It is a moment of crisis, of decision, of transformation. It is when we stop fleeing ourselves and turn to face ourselves, when we stop wishing we were someone else and accept who we actually are, when we stop living in fantasy or regret and embrace the reality of our existence. Choosing oneself, and in that choosing, paradoxically, we become free, we become authentic, we become, in Kierkegaard's terms, a self, a unified, conscious, responsible being in relation to ourselves, to others, and to the infinite. He walked through Copenhagen with this question always present. Am I choosing myself? Am I living authentically? Or am I hiding, fleeing, pretending? The streets he walked, Nørregade, Østergade, the path around the lakes, these streets witnessed his continuous choosing, his continuous return to himself, his continuous commitment to becoming who he most deeply was. Choosing oneself, we say it again softly like a lullaby. Choosing oneself. And this choice includes everything, includes our past, even the parts we regret, includes our limitations, even the ones that frustrate us, includes our particular historical moment, our particular family, our particular body, our particular mind. All of it chosen, all of it claimed, all of it transformed by the act of conscious acceptance. This is not passive resignation. Kierkegaard distinguished sharply between choosing oneself and merely accepting one's fate. To choose oneself is active, passionate, creative. It is to take what is given and make something of it, to take the raw materials of one's life and craft from them an authentic existence. And in choosing oneself, one also chooses others, chooses relationship, chooses community, chooses love. For the authentic self is not isolated but connected. The self that has chosen itself can genuinely encounter other selves, can love without losing itself, can commit without dissolving. Choosing oneself, choosing oneself. The phrase becomes almost musical now, almost rhythmic, matching the rhythm of breath, the rhythm of heartbeat, the rhythm of walking through an ancient city as night falls. And we, listening across time, feel the invitation in these words. The gentle invitation to choose ourselves, to claim our own lives, to stop fleeing and start becoming. Kierkegaard knew this was difficult. He knew it required courage, required honesty, required the willingness to face anxiety and despair. But he also knew it was the only path to authentic existence, to genuine freedom, to real joy. He knew because he lived it, because he walked it, because he wrote it into being in those countless pages filled with pseudonyms and explorations and invitations. Choosing oneself, and in that choosing, finding oneself chosen, finding oneself held by something greater, something infinite, something that has always already accepted us before we accept ourselves. This is the mystery at the heart of Kierkegaard's philosophy, that in choosing ourselves most fully, we discover we are not alone, that we exist in relationship, that we are, in some mysterious way, loved. And we drift now softly through this idea, choosing oneself, letting the words become softer, more distant, like footsteps fading down a Copenhagen street at twilight, like the sound of a church bell absorbed by fog, like thoughts dissolving into sleep. And so we arrive gently at the deepest place, the place where all of Kierkegaard's ideas converge like paths meeting in a quiet garden at dusk, the place he called standing before the infinite, standing before the infinite. Let those words settle like evening settling over the city, standing before the infinite. This is the human condition as Kierkegaard understood it. We are finite beings who are aware of infinity, temporal beings who sense eternity, limited beings who imagine the unlimited, standing before the infinite, and in that standing, feeling both our smallness and our greatness. Small because we are so limited, so brief, so particular. Great because we can conceive of infinity at all, can question, can choose, can leap in faith toward what we cannot fully comprehend. Kierkegaard wrote that the self is a relation that relates to itself, and in relating to itself relates to something other. Complex formulation that becomes simpler the more we sit with it. We are not self-contained, not self-sufficient. We exist always in relationship, always in tension, always in dialogue with something beyond ourselves. And that something, whether we call it God or existence or the infinite, is what gives our finite lives their depth, their meaning, their possibility. Standing before the infinite, standing before the infinite, we let the words repeat slowly, like waves on a shore, each repetition softening the edges, deepening the meaning. In Copenhagen, in the 19th century, Kierkegaard stood before the infinite in the quiet of his study, on the streets at dawn, in the church on Sunday morning, in the solitude of his own heart. And he felt the vertigo, the anxiety, the despair, and also the possibility, the grace, the invitation. He saw that we are always standing at this threshold. The threshold between the finite and infinite, between time and eternity, between necessity and freedom. We cannot step back into pure finitude, cannot pretend we are merely animals or objects without consciousness or choice. But we also cannot leap into pure infinity, cannot escape our embodiment, our historicity, our particular limited existence. We stand before the infinite, and in that standing, we become ourselves. Not by resolving the tension, but by living it. Not by choosing one side or the other, but by existing in the middle, in the relation, in the dialogue. This is what makes us anxious. The dizziness of standing at this threshold, of being caught between finite and infinite. This is what makes us despair, the impossibility of resolving the tension, of being merely one thing or the other. But this is also what makes faith possible. The leap across the gap, the commitment to relationship, the embrace of paradox. Standing before the infinite, and the infinite is gentle, patient, waiting, not demanding, but inviting, not forcing but allowing. Kierkegaard's God, his infinite, respects freedom absolutely, loves without compulsion, invites without manipulation. We are free to turn away, free to flee into distraction or despair, but we are also free to turn toward, to stand consciously, to leap in faith. Standing before the infinite, standing before the infinite. The words become softer now, slower, like the last light fading from the Copenhagen sky, like the lamp in Kierkegaard's study burning lower, like breath slowing into sleep. And we feel ourselves standing there too, held in that gentle relationship with something greater than ourselves, something infinite and mysterious and kind. All of Kierkegaard's philosophy circles back to this, to the single individual standing before the infinite, making choices, leaping in faith, becoming a self. He wrote for that individual, for you, for me, for anyone who has ever felt the anxiety of freedom, the despair of not being oneself, the call to authentic existence, standing before the infinite, and finding that the infinite is already there, already with us, already holding us even before we turn toward it. This is the mystery, the grace, the gentle truth at the heart of all the complexity. We are not alone. We have never been alone. We stand before the infinite, and the infinite stands before us, with us, in us. And now, as Act 4 draws to its close, we let ourselves rest in this standing. No need to move, no need to leap just now. No need to do anything but breathe and be and let go. The dizziness of freedom becomes the gentleness of grace. The sickness unto death becomes the healing of acceptance. The leap of faith becomes the soft falling into sleep, and choosing oneself becomes the simplest thing. Being here, now, breathing, present, held by something infinite and gentle as we drift, as we dissolve, as we let go into the deep peace that Kierkegaard himself sought and sometimes found in the twilight streets of Copenhagen, in the pages of his books, in the silence of his own soul. Standing before the infinite, standing, resting, sleeping, home. And so we find ourselves walking through the evening streets of Copenhagen, the cobblestones still warm from the day's light, now softening into twilight, into that gentle hour between day and night when the sky holds all its colors at once, deep blue and amber and gold. The year is imaginary, suspended in time. Kierkegaard walks beside us, his dark coat trailing, his familiar figure moving through the streets he knew so well. These streets that held all his thoughts, all his wrestlings, all his quiet revelations. We walk slowly, very slowly. There is no hurry now. There has never been any hurry. The philosopher is older now in this imagined evening, his face lined with the years of thinking, of choosing, of standing before the infinite. But there is something peaceful in his expression, something settled. The shadows grow longer on the old buildings. The windows begin to glow with candlelight, one by one, like thoughts illuminating, and we simply walk, feeling the cool air on our skin, hearing the distant sound of water, the harbor not far away, always the water, always Copenhagen surrounding him, cradling him. He speaks quietly, more to himself than to us, about how a life is not a line but a circle, how we return again and again to the same truths, the same moments, each time understanding them more deeply, spiraling inward towards something essential, something true. And we listen. We half listen, letting his words become part of the evening air, part of the blue hour settling over the city. The streets wind gently, familiar paths he walked thousands of times, past the same churches, the same squares, the same quiet corners where he stopped to rest, to think, to simply be. And in our walking, we feel the weight of the day releasing, the weight of thought itself growing lighter, becoming as light as the air, as transparent as the twilight. We are walking through philosophy itself now, walking through a life devoted to understanding what it means to exist, to choose, to leap. But the concepts dissolve into something simpler, into the feeling of feet on stone, breath in the chest, the infinite sky above, always above, holding everything. And Kierkegaard nods slowly, as if agreeing with something unspoken, as if the evening itself has offered an answer. And we walk on through the gentle blue dimness, the world softening at its edges, becoming dream, becoming memory, becoming the peace that lives beneath all questions. We pause now at a bridge, one of the many bridges crossing the quiet canals, and lean against the stone railing, feeling its solidity, its coolness. The water below moves slowly, reflecting the sky, reflecting the first stars beginning to appear, tiny points of light in the darkening blue. Kierkegaard gazes down at the water, and we gaze with him, watching the reflections ripple and reform, never quite still, never quite the same. Like thoughts, like selves, always becoming. He speaks of legacy, but softly, without urgency, how he never knew if his words would reach anyone, how he wrote and wrote, filling page after page, book after book, under different names and different voices, all trying to say the same thing in different ways, trying to wake people up to their own existence, to their own freedom, their own responsibility. But now, in this imagined evening, he can sense how his words moved forward through time, how they touched other minds, other seekers, the existentialists who came after, Sartre and Camus and Heidegger, even those who never read him, even those who found the same truths walking their own streets in their own cities. The idea that existence precedes essence, that we create ourselves through our choices, that anxiety is not a disease, but a sign of our freedom, that despair can be the doorway to authentic life. All of this rippling outward like the water below us, circles expanding, touching distant shores. And we rest here on the bridge, feeling the peace of continuity, of being part of something larger, not needing to understand it all, just feeling it, the way the water feels the current, the way the stars feel the darkness around them. We breathe slowly, in and out, in and out. The philosopher beside us is quiet now, simply present, no longer teaching, no longer striving, just being, just existing in this moment on this bridge as the light fades and fades. The city around us grows softer, the sounds distant and muffled, a church bell somewhere, a voice calling gently, a door closing, all the markers of human life continuing, ongoing, eternal in its patterns. And we are held in this, held in the twilight. Held in the gentle understanding that everything Kierkegaard struggled to say can be found in this simple moment. Standing, breathing, watching water move, watching light fade, watching the darkness come not as an ending but as a deepening, a softening, a return to rest. And the legacy is not in the books or the arguments or the brilliant phrases. It is in this feeling, this peace, this acceptance of existence itself. And we breathe, and the water moves, and the stars grow brighter, one by one, appearing in their ancient patterns as they always have, as they always will. We leave the bridge slowly, so slowly, our footsteps barely audible now on the stones, and wander toward the old cemetery, the grounds where many of Copenhagen's thinkers rest. The gates stand open in the twilight, welcoming, not forbidding, and we enter into a space of deep quiet, deep peace. The trees here are ancient, their branches spreading like thoughts, like the branching paths of a life, of many lives. The light is very dim now, just the last blue glow in the western sky and the first silver of starlight filtering through the leaves. We walk among the stones, reading no names, needing no names, just feeling the presence of all those who lived and thought and struggled and finally came to rest in the earth, to rest in completion. Kierkegaard moves between the monuments like a shadow, like a memory. And we understand that this imagined walk is taking us to that place beyond striving, beyond anxiety, beyond even the leap of faith, to the ground itself, the ground that holds everything. He speaks, and his voice is barely a whisper now, blending with the rustle of leaves, about how all his philosophy was really about one thing, about becoming who you truly are, not the self the world wants, not the self that fear creates, but the self that stands transparent before God, before the infinite, before the mystery. And in becoming that self, in making that leap, in choosing over and over again to be authentic, there is peace. Not the peace of having no questions, but the peace of living within them, of accepting the beautiful, terrible gift of freedom. We pause beneath a tree, an old tree that might have been here in Kierkegaard's actual lifetime, its roots deep in the Danish earth. And we feel those roots, feel ourselves connected to this ground, this place, this moment in the eternal now. The philosopher sits slowly on a bench, or perhaps on the grass, it doesn't matter, and we sit with him, or perhaps we are him, or perhaps there is no distinction anymore in this deep twilight. this deep peace. All the concepts dissolve, aesthetic, ethical, religious, all one journey, all one path spiraling inward, choice and freedom and authenticity. All meaning simply this: to be awake, to be present, to be yourself, fully yourself. And now in the quiet of the cemetery with the stars brightening above, this seems so simple, so obvious, so peaceful. Why did it ever seem difficult? Why did it ever cause such anguish? In this moment, it is all just being, just existing. The trees sway gently, the air cools, somewhere a bird settles into sleep with a soft sound, and we settle too. Settle into the earth, settle into the self, settle into the infinite acceptance that holds all our strivings, all our becomings, all our journeys home. Time dissolves here. We are no longer sure if minutes have passed or hours or lifetimes. The darkness is deeper now, but not dark, filled with stars. So many stars above us, the infinite sky that Kierkegaard often contemplated, the infinite before which we all stand. And we lie back now, perhaps on the grass, perhaps on clouds, perhaps on nothing at all, simply floating in the gentle darkness, held, always held. The philosopher's voice comes from very far away now, or very close, impossible to tell, and he reminds us so gently of the three stages, but they blur together now like watercolors. The aesthetic life of experience and beauty, yes, we have lived that, we are living it now, experiencing this moment, this beauty, this twilight. The ethical life of choice and commitment. Yes, we have chosen to be here, to listen, to understand. We are always choosing, even now, choosing peace, choosing rest. And the religious life of faith and surrender. Yes, we are surrendering now, surrendering into sleep, into trust, into the infinite that holds us. All three at once, all one thing, all just being. And his words become a lullaby now, repeating the same truths in different ways, the same way the stars repeat their patterns, the same way the earth turns, the same way breath follows breath. You are free, and in that freedom, choose yourself. Choose peace, choose rest. The anxiety was only the dizziness of freedom, and now we are no longer dizzy. We are flying, floating, dissolving into freedom itself. The despair was only the forgetting of the self, and now we remember who we are, eternal, infinite, home. The leap of faith, the leap, but we are not leaping now, we are landing softly in the arms of everything. And Kierkegaard himself is fading now, becoming one with the darkness, becoming one with the stars. His words trail off into silence, into the sound of wind in trees, into the sound of breath, into the sound of heartbeat, into the sound beneath all sounds. And we understand that this is what he always meant, this peace, this rest, this acceptance of existence as it is, not as we fear it might be, but as it truly is, infinite, eternal, peaceful. Always peaceful beneath all the noise, beneath all the striving, there is this stillness, this rest. And Copenhagen sleeps around us, the city that held him, that holds us, that holds all seekers, all wanderers, all those trying to understand. And understanding comes at last, not as an answer, but as a letting go, a releasing, a sleeping. And the stars shine and shine and shine, and we are held in the infinite, in the eternal, in the peace that passes all understanding, all. And now there is only softness, only peace. The philosopher sleeps, his work complete, his life a gift given to time, to all of us who came after, seeking, wondering, trying to understand what it means to exist. But we know now, it means this moment, this breath, this peace. It means choosing, and having chosen, resting. It means standing before the infinite, and dissolving into it, becoming home. The stars continue their slow wheel across the sky as they did over Copenhagen in Kierkegaard's time, as they do now, as they always will. Eternal patterns, eternal return, eternal peace. And his words echo so softly now, barely words at all, just feelings, just truth. Be yourself, be yourself. You are free, you are loved, you are home. The stages of existence, one stage now, the stage of sleep, of rest, of perfect peace. The anxiety dissolves. There is nothing to fear, nothing to choose, only surrender, only trust. The despair lifts. There is no self to forget, no self to remember, only being, only peace, only. The city breathes in sleep, all of Copenhagen, all the world, breathing together, one breath, one being, one infinite peace. And we breathe with it, so slowly now, barely breathing at all, just resting in the breath, in the infinite breath that breathes us. That has always breathed us, that will always the legacy ripples on, through time, through space, through minds and hearts not yet born. Kierkegaard's gift, the gift of authenticity, of freedom, of existence itself. But now the gift is given, received, and we rest. The twilight has become night, the night has become infinity, and we are held, so gently held, in the darkness that is not dark, in the silence that is not empty, in the peace that has no end. Copenhagen sleeps, the philosopher sleeps, the words sleep, the ideas sleep, everything sleeps in the infinite cradle, rocking gently. And you sleep, you are sleeping. You have always been sleeping, this peaceful sleep, this eternal rest. Home. You are home. In the city of thought, in the city of light, in the city that exists beyond all cities, in the self that is no self, in the choice that is no choice, in the peace that is all peace. Kierkegaard rests, and in his rest, in his peace, in his homecoming, we rest, we sleep, we are home. And the stars shine on forever and ever. Peace. Thank you for listening tonight. If this story helped you drift off, consider leaving a like and subscribing for more calming stories. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you next time.